Here's an article from the Bowling Digest on Earl Anthony. It's kind of lengthy, but it's worth a read or a listen. So I'll be just reading this, and hopefully it'll turn out with the proper intonations and inflections that the writer intended. Earl Anthony, the ultimate competitor. He was 31 years old, much older than most rookies, but no less confused and unsure of what life on the PBA Tour would hold for him. He had no illusions of grandeur, no great expectations. His goals were simple, and he talked about them in the paddock with several veteran players one day in the winter of 1970. I said to a few guys that I didn't expect to ever win, but that I hoped to make enough money to make a living, Earl Anthony recalls. Don Glover and Butch Ghart were there. I was just getting to know everybody, and I felt a little uncomfortable because they looked at me like I was crazy. Butch turned to me and said, "Don't worry, you're going to win lots of them." It embarrassed me. I laughed, he laughed, and I walked away. Anthony laughs again when he thinks back to that moment. Of course, how could he have known what he'd accomplish? No one had accomplished so much before, and now that Anthony has announced his retirement at age 53, after an illustrious career that began 21 years ago, it's doubtful anyone will accomplish that much again. The Earl won a record 41 PBA titles and 6 Player of the Year awards. In 1975, he became the first PBA bowler to earn $100,000 for a season, and in 1982 became the first to hit $1 million in career earnings, and so on and so on. When I think of Earl, PBA Commissioner Joe Antonora says, I think of an athlete who dominated his sport for a pretty good length of time. He has nothing to prove as far as being a great player, Marshall Holman says. In my mind, he's the best who ever lived. That opinion is shared by many. And one has to wonder what Anthony would have accomplished had he started his career earlier. As a youth, Anthony had aspired to play baseball. In fact, after serving in the Air Force, he pitched in the minor leagues in the Baltimore Orioles chain before an elbow ligament injury cut short that dream. At 21, he found himself driving a forklift on the graveyard shift at West Coast Grocery Company in Tacoma, earning $2.19 an hour. However, that job led to a fortune when Anthony joined the company's summer bowling league. I had thrown a bowling ball a few times, but never bowled in a league or anything before, Anthony says. I ended up averaging 165, and I was hooked. He also was determined to improve. Virtually every morning after leaving work, Anthony would head for Pacific Lanes for 5 hours of practice. I didn't know there was a pro tour, but when I found out, I saw it as a chance to stop punching a clock and get back into sports, he says. I was averaging 217 and winning a lot of local tournaments, and I found I could bowl with some of the best bowlers in the Northwest. I turned 31 and decided it was now or never. It was getting to the point where I'd be too old. That year, he finished 11th in the money standings with $26,200. He climbed to 5th with $40,105 in 1971, was 7th with $34,985 in 1972, 5th with $45,813 in 73, and 1st in 74 with $99,585. It generally takes several years to get the feel of things, but he bowled extremely well right off the bat, says Harry Golden, the longtime PBA tournament director who is now semi-retired and serving as tour consultant. Actually, he did bowl in 3 tournaments in the mid-1960s. I don't think he cashed, and he went back home. But when he came out full-time in 1970, he finished 2nd in the first tournament he bowled in Wichita. Midway through the year, Anthony won his first title, the Seattle Open, in his home state. After that, there was no stopping him. He won once again in 71, 3 times in 72, twice again in 73, and then took 6 titles in 74 and 7 in both 75 and 76. The tour's popularity was never higher, and Anthony was its star. The TV ratings were the highest then, recalls Mark Roth, who dethroned Anthony in the late 70s, and whose 33 career titles are a distant second to Earl's mark. I look back at the late 70s, early 80s, when Mark, Earl, and I were the so-called Big Three, Marshall Holman says. At the time, we may have taken it for granted, but those were great years. It's always important to have a dominant force, and Earl was the star. People liked to root for him. They welcomed him into their living rooms almost every week, and the fans were very comfortable with him. Indeed, Anthony placed in the top 5 a record 145 times in his career, and that put him in a lot of memorable TV matches. I probably made 130 TV shows, Anthony says, so I had the opportunity to bowl lots of great players. Don Johnson was one of the toughest, so was Dick Weber, Don Carter, Roth, and Holman. Bowling is a game of mistakes, and they made the fewest. That's why they were so tough to beat. What made Anthony so tough to beat? He was a very vicious competitor, Golden says. He hates to lose at anything, whether it's checkers with his grandmother or ping pong with his kids. Jay Randolph couldn't agree more. You find that out when you play golf with him, says Anthony's partner on the NBC TV telecasts of the PBA Fall Tour. Very fierce. He's a great trier, Holman adds. He had a determination and a way of concentrating that seemed to surpass the rest of the guys. Anthony's mechanics were as superb as his mental game. He had better ball speed than anybody in the game, says Hall of Famer and fellow lefty Johnny Petraglia. He definitely had the best touch, adds another southpaw and bowler of the year, Mike Albee. He could play all angles, but speed control and touch were probably his biggest assets. Earl had a tremendous feel to know what worked and what didn't work, says ESPN bowling play-by-play announcer Denny Schreiner, who was the PBA Tour's broadcast director during Anthony's heyday. Once Earl got locked into something, he could repeat it over and over. When he figured out what it took that week, he was unstoppable. Anthony combined his skills and savvy with an unshakable single-mindedness. He was not satisfied with anything but winning, Mike Durbin notes. He didn't enter a tournament he didn't think he could win. He was relentless. He always seemed to throw the ball in the pocket, and he didn't make mistakes. Probably 90% of the players on tour have the ability to succeed, says Steve Cook, a lefty who had a great deal of success against Anthony in their head-to-head meetings. But not everybody has the dedication or the desire or the mental game. Earl had all three. Still, one factor has put an asterisk alongside Anthony's records in the minds of some observers. If there was a drawback to his career, it was that he was left-handed. Schreiner says, as great as he was, as many records as he set, people will still wonder how great he would have been if he had bowled from the right side. I don't think it bothered him, but I don't think he necessarily received the acclaim he should have. Anthony is aware of such talk, of course, and even is willing to concede his natural advantage. In any sport, someone has an edge, he says, but more so in bowling. Before the PBA had its own maintenance crew, there were weeks when the lefties got the shot. In the first tournament I bowled in as a pro, January of 1970, in the first stop in the Winter Tour in Wichita, 14 of the 16 finalists were lefties. Then in San Jose that year, all 16 finalists were lefties. However, there also were weeks when left-handers wouldn't get a single check. The PBA started its own crew in 1971, and it helped a lot. They tried to dress the lanes with oil to make them more playable for righties, if they were disadvantaged, or the other way around. I bowled on that almost my whole career, so I didn't go through the other too long. Holman insists the lefty-righty edge was never a factor for Anthony. If anything, Holman says, he did his best bowling when left-handers didn't bowl well, which is very unusual. Golden supports that claim. I remember one tournament at Hartford Lanes in Detroit when I saw Earl lead the qualifier, playing the fourth arrow on the left side, and no other lefty got a check, he says. He had the ability to do that, to compete on any condition. Anthony's formula for success on the tour is somewhat complex. You need to have a great deal of talent to make a living on tour, he says, but to be a consistent winner, you need the ability to concentrate well, bowl under pressure, cope with living on the road, deal with the press, miss meals, do exhibitions, and constantly travel. The most important ingredient is making bowling the most important thing in your life. If it isn't, you're not going to play to the best of your ability. You need to be this way on every ball you throw. It's very wearing on your mind. It also wore on Anthony's family life. The worst thing, he says, was traveling across the country. I was away from my kids, 2 daughters and a son, and their mother, his ex-wife, had to raise them. I was on the road 35 weeks out of the year. In the summer, the whole family could get into the car and drive to the stops together, but most of all, there was a lot of loneliness. I'd watch a lot of TV and read a lot of books. You have to look for diversions. His dislike for that lifestyle is probably the biggest reason he chose to retire for the second time. He first retired in 1983, only to return to try the senior tour. However, though he won't be competing, he'll always be admired. His accomplishments were such that he helped the PBA achieve the kind of exposure we were seeking, Antonora says. But I think what I'll most remember about Earl is his coming back from the heart attack suffered in June of 1978. That he was able to accomplish so much after that is remarkable. You had to be at your best because Earl was always at his best, says Hall of Famer Dave Sutar. He was so totally into his own game. I think the majority of players tried their hardest to beat him because he was the best. It was a lot of fun bowling him, Roth adds. Most of the fans rooted for him, which was understandable. He was on top at the time, and I was trying to knock him off, but I always enjoyed competing against him. It was a terrible feeling bowling him, says the legendary Dick Weber, disagreeing with a laugh, but it was thrilling too. At times, Anthony's consistency could be uncanny. I remember him bowling Gil Sliker one time, says Schreiner. I think it was in the Long Island Open. It was a terrific match going into the 10th frame, and that's when Earl threw 3 of the best shots of the entire week. All 3 exactly the same. The ball hit the pocket exactly the same, and the pins fell exactly the same. It was like watching a replay of the first shot 2 times. What I'll remember most about Earl is winning my first title against him, Albee says. I had bowled 2 matches before the title match and didn't miss the pocket, but then in the first frame against Earl I missed the head pin. I said to myself, well, second place won't be too bad, but then I figured I'd come that far, I might as well go all the way. I had to forget who I was bowling. Randolph marvels at how quickly Anthony's adapted to doing the commentary for NBC TV's pro bowling telecasts. We were in Detroit, and there were an inordinate amount of strikes thrown, Randolph says. The match was over quickly, and we had to fill 22 minutes. When we told Earl, he said, "You're kidding." He did a great job, though. He did an interview with Mark Roth, but basically we filled it with a lot of babble. The word used most often to describe Anthony is class. Earl was a very good ambassador for professional bowling, Golden says. He's articulate, and very seldom will he say the wrong thing. He was always the perfect gentleman, Glenn Allison adds. He was certainly a contributing factor to the success of the tour. Earl contributed a lot of class to both the sport and the tour, Durbin says. He was a great champion. Some of the senior tour players, in fact, are especially sorry to see him pack it in. I hate to see him retire. We could use him to help promote the senior tour, Sutar says. We really could use a named player like him. I wish him well, adds Weber, but I'm sorry he's quitting. We need the stars out here. Anthony doesn't expect to change his mind, however. If he could have done anything differently, he says, it might have been to start bowling sooner. Then again, he adds, I'd been in the service and had a job for 10 years. I was trying to support a family, so maybe I was a little more mature than the other guys who were just starting out, and that helped. You know, the more I think of it, if I had it to do over again, I might have played golf. Those associated with bowling are glad he didn't.